Yesterday we had read that Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu to tell the Jews, you saw with your own eyes what I did to Egypt. In terms of that indicates our value. So Rashi in his commentaries explains that although the Egyptians for centuries violated the 7 no-hide laws and many other nations, God never reacted to demonstrate his divine providence and his divine retribution against them. But because they enslaved the Jews, who to God, they're the most special, therefore God reacted the way he reacted. And he displayed his might by destroying them. Then he says, I carried you on the wings of an eagle, and I brought you to me. Okay? Which now they're holding at Sinai to receive the Torah. So he says something phenomenal. The Mishnah tells us if you want to marry a woman, you're able to marry her in one of 3 ways. Either by giving her something of value, which it's worth minimally a cent, and you give it to her in marriage, and she receives it in the presence of witnesses, she's married. What about if you give her a document, what we call a shtar, and it says in the document, I'm marrying you with this document, and it says the name of the man, the name of the woman, and it's signed with witnesses, and it's given the presence of witnesses, the woman is married. That's the second way one is able to marry a woman. The third is through cohabitation. If a man has relationship with a woman for the sake of marriage, meaning the witness is outside the room and he says, I'm going into the room to cohabit with this woman to acquire her as my wife, not just have do a sexual act, but rather for the sake of marriage, she's married. So you're able to marry a woman 1 of 3 ways. Kesef, either the currency itself or the value of the currency, with the document, or through the act of intimacy known as cohabitation. We find that all 3 of them have relevance to us when we left Egypt. When we left Egypt, we were told we must borrow the silver and golden vessels of the Egyptians. We experienced the bondage for 210 years. As we leave, and what is the leaving of Egypt? It's part of the ascent to Sinai to become God's people. So when we left Egypt, what did God give us? He told us to take the wealth of Egypt, the silver and gold vessels. When we came to Sinai, what did he give us? He gave us his script. What was his script? The Torah. That's a script. As it says, Torah tziva lonu Moshe, morosha kilas Yaakov. The Torah which was given to us by Moshe is the heritage of the Jewish people. We know in Hebrew, the shin and the sin are the same letter. It's only difference is where you put the dot on top. Put it on one side, it's pronounced as a shin. If you put it on the other side, it's pronounced as a sin. In Hebrew, the word morosa means betrothed. And the Gemara tells us that through the giving of the Torah, we became the betrothed of Hashem. We became the betrothed. So how did we become the betrothed of God? Through the written narrative or the written script which Hashem gave us, by which we live. That's the Torah itself. So we find the first method of marriage, of betrothal, is what? Is money, monetary value. That's the gold and silver vessels. That's kesef. Sinai is what? Is the script of obligation. That's the shtar. And what is the act of intimacy? Act of intimacy was the tablets. The tablets on which the 10 commandments were etched. Let's understand. Before Moshe ascended to heaven, we already heard the 10 commandments from God. Moshe ascended for 40 days and 40 nights. What happened? Then he was taught the Torah in entirety. and he came down with 2 tablets. He witnesses the Jews engaged in idolatry, the sin of the golden calf. He smashes the tablets. So it was about to happen. It didn't happen. What Moshe goes up, supplicates God, comes down on Yom Kippur with a second set of tablets. It's Yom Kippurim. It's in time immemorial. That day is set as a day of forgiveness. Just as God forgave the Jews on that day for the sin of the golden calf, and the confirmation on that was because he came down with a second set of tablets. So therefore, for all time, the 10th day of Tishrei, which is known as Yom Kippur, is the Day of Atonement for the Jewish people. That itself was the what? That was the consummation of the marriage. So we find all 3 components. One, Kesef, Shtar, and Bio. Money, when we left Egypt, the script, which was given to us Sinai, which is actually the Torah itself. And then we had the tab. Which tablets? The second tablets. First tablets were broken because we weren't worthy. Then we were reinstated with the second tablets. That was the confirmation. Forever, we are the people of God, the chosen people, and God will never choose another nation other than us. That was confirmed as a result of what? Of Moshe Rabbeinu's supplication and the reinstatement of the second tablets. That's what happened. Now, I'd ask the question, Yaakov flees to the home of the community of his father-in-law, Lavan. Read about this. And he was told he has to take a wife, one of Lavan's daughters. Initially, Lavan was as they say, a bad man, and that's an understatement, how bad he was, how conniving, how dishonest he was. And Yaakov commits himself. He will work 7 years for his future father-in-law, for the hand of Rachel. What happens? After 7 years, they go to the wedding, and instead of Rachel being under the chuppah, he switches Leah for Rachel. He only realizes in the morning that it was Leah and not Rachel. And Yaakov was upset with his father. What did you fool me? You cheated me. I worked 7 years for Rachel. Lavan has no problem. He's not fazed by this. He says, but you realize in our community, we never marry the younger before the older. Therefore, I put Leah, the older daughter, my older daughter before the younger daughter. You want her? You work another 7 years. Yaakov says, I'm willing to work another 7 years for the hand of Rachel. So a week later was the second marriage on the condition that he works another 7 years for Rachel, which he did. So he worked 14 years for his 2 wives. The difficulty is, what's the law if a person marries a woman and he thinks her name is Chana and she turns out it's Esther? He was fooled. He never intended to marry Miss A because he wanted to marry Miss B. And he's duped. Is the marriage a marriage? It's a marriage under false pretenses. It's not a valid marriage. So if the question is, why did Yaakov retain Leah as a wife? He should have said to Lavan, I'm not married to your older daughter. Because when initially I cohabited with her, and my intention was to marry Rachel, not Leah. Yet we find that Yaakov retained Leah as the wife, and she's one of the matriarchs. Leah and Rachel are the matriarchs of the Jewish people. They're the mothers of the 12 tribes. Leah was the mother of 6 of the tribes. Rachel was 2 of the tribes. Yosef Binyamin. But why was it considered a valid marriage? Seemingly, it was on false pretenses. This is a question we asked. So what I said was, when Yaakov named his first son, the oldest son of Yaakov, what was his name? His name was Reuven. When he blessed him before he passed away, he said to Reuven, Reishis kochi v'reishis oni. Yaakov himself was how old when he married Leah or Rachel? He was 83 years old. And he says, from the time I was born till this moment, I never expended a droplet of semen from my body. You're the first of my semen. Yaakov was so holy, He never wasted a droplet of his semen, regardless of why, what the circumstance was. Reuven was the first of his issue. Now, Yaakov was such a holy person. Yaakov understood that if God wanted him not, Leah should not be his wife, he wouldn't have expended his seed into Leah. His first seed was in Leah, that was a confirmation to him that Leah is meant to be the matriarch. Because otherwise God wouldn't have allowed it. That was a confirmation of that. Okay? Now, I was thinking we have the three patriarchs. Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. The most special of the three patriarchs was who? Was Yaakov. Proof of the reality was, because Yaakov fathered the 12 tribes. Yitzchak did not father the 12 tribes, neither did Avram father the 12 tribes. They were not at a level sufficiently purge of whatever of the sin of Adam that they could father those 12 tribes. Only Yaakov was spiritually purged sufficiently that he could father the 12 tribes. That was Yaakov. Yaakov, what was he quantified by the Torah? He personified Torah. So the ultimate level of spirituality, the one who was most spiritually advanced was Yaakov, because he was Yaakov Ishtam Yeshav. So Yaakov represents the capacity of the Jewish people to be the ones that stand at Sinai to receive the Torah at its most advanced level. Because Yaakov, although Avram studied the Torah before it was given at Sinai, Yitzchak studied the Torah in its Torah before and observed it before it was given at Sinai. But Yaakov, the Torah quantifies because he personifies Torah itself. And who's meant to receive the Torah at Sinai? The 12 tribes. The descendants of his 12 children, each one having its distinct characteristic. So Yaakov is the equivalent of the Luchos Shnios, of the second tablets. The eternal father of the Jewish people represents Torah. What bound us inextricably that we could never be separated from God, receiving the Torah at Sinai? Because God created the world only for that purpose, for the observance of the Torah and for the nation who will be the ones who actually will receive that Torah. So it's interesting. So I would say that what was Avram's attribute? Chesed. What's chesed? That's giving. So I would say Avram corresponds to kesef. That was the beginning of the involvement of creating the connection between God and the Jewish people. Avram was the kesef, or Avram would correspond to the wealth which he took out of Egypt. First of all, what I quoted originally, that was the Baal HaTurim. The Baal HaTurim said that when God took us as his people, it was all three approaches of marriage: kesef, shtar, and bia. Money, the document, and the act of cohabitation. Leaving Egypt, taking the wealth, that was the act of marriage through giving money. Sinai, hearing the words of Hashem, that was the script, that's the document. Ultimately, the total unification of us with God, that was the Luchos Shnios, that was the second set of tablets. That's what it was. Now, who was the main matriarch? Between Rachel and Leah, who was the primary matriarch? Rachel was the matriarch. So the reason why he did not divorce Leah, as I said, because he was the first seed, she was the first issue, her child. It was meant she should be the matriarch. But who was the primary matriarch? Rachel. That was after. The Luchos Rishonos were broken. It didn't happen. But the second Luchos, that's what clinched it. That's solidified the connection, the relationship between us and God. Never ever to be God can never send us off. That was the Luchos Shnios. Now, this is Yaakov. Yaakov's life, we see, reflects God's presence in heaven. I once mentioned the name of Rabbeinu Bachio, that the level of relationship God had with Yaakov, he didn't have with the other patriarchs. We find that Yaakov, in every aspect of his being, he reflects the heavenly retinue and the heavenly throne. Why? This is Kabbalistic. So he explains that the heavenly throne, what we call the Kisei HaKavod of God, where everything emanates from, the 70 angels who encircle the heavenly throne of Hashem, of God. The 70 angels are comprised of 4 groups, and in total, it's 70. And all 70, who did they emanate from? They emanate from God, because God is the source of everything. Yaakov himself, on the terrestrial level, when he went to Egypt with 70 souls, 70 individuals. These were his descendants. So there were 71 people went to Egypt. He with the 70 members of his family. The 70 members of his family, they were children from 4 wives. So the 70 which emanated from Yaakov emanated from 4 different groups. They were 4 different groups. Each one had a different mother. Therefore, Rabbeinu Bachya says, you see that what Yaakov was on the terrestrial level is what God is on the heavenly level. Yaakov is a total representation of God's presence, and therefore God, that's why God had such love for him, because he chose him to be his representation on earth. That's Rabbeinu Bachya. We find of all the patriarchs, we say in Yoshua Seise Elyon, God commands his angels to watch over us. So what watches over a person? God sends his angels to watch over us. Yaakov Avinu was beyond that. We find that when Yaakov had the prophecy on Mount Moriah, Har Moriah, and he saw angels ascending and descending, it says, Vashem Omer Olav, God stood on top of that ladder and watched over Yaakov. So the Ramban writes over there that every other person has a malach, has an angel. God sends his angels to watch over him. God said to Yaakov, you don't need any malach. You don't need an angel to watch over you. I will watch over you. And because I'm always watching over you, from now going forward, you don't need an angel to watch over you. Now the question is, why doesn't he need an angel to watch over him? As I'm saying, because Yaakov himself is the most special of the 3 patriarchs. And ultimately, he has the potential, after it's fully fleshed out, to magnify and represent God's profile in heaven. The 70 emanating from 4 wives, he fathering all of them, everything emanating from Yaakov, as the 4 groups of the heavenly angels, which are 70, emanate because God wills them. That it's an expression of his achdus, of his unity. Okay? But again, it's sourced in the Balaturim, that the 3 stages started with leaving Egypt, taking the wealth of Egypt, and the script, which is the Torah itself, and the luchos, that's the confirmation, that's the consummation of the marriage. We find that at Sinai, it says that God had come out towards us, like a groom goes out to greet his bride. That's why God went out to greet us. Just want to conclude this piece like this. Shabbos, each Abid on Shabbos has a different opening. Each of the silent Shmon Esreis have 7 blessings, but each one opens differently. Friday night, what is the opening of Friday night? Ato Kidashto. You sanctified. Kidashto. The morning Shachris is what? Is Yismach Moshe Manos Kelko. Mincha, which is the closing Amidah of Shabbos, we say Ato Echod V'Shibch Echod. Mi Kamchi Shel Echod. You're one, your name is one, and who's like your people, which are one. That's the commonality. So the Shalach Kodesh writes that when Shabbos, we say that the Gemara tells us that Shabbos is Me'ein Olam Haba. It has a semblance of the world to come. Why? Because just as the world to come, we have a relation with God, Shabbos, we also have a relationship with God. God's presence enters into this existence, what we call the Shekhinah, and when Shabbos begins, God enters at a certain level. As the day continues, that level intensifies. The beginning of the Shabbos is at a lesser level. The morning, it intensifies, and it climaxes in the afternoon. So he says the Shalom Kodesh. The beginning of Shabbos is the equivalent of Kedushin, Ersin. That's the beginning of the marriage. That's called betrothal. The morning is the wedding. That's the celebration. That's Yismach. Moshe Manas Chokel. You rejoice at the wedding. That's after the chuppah. Mincha, the Shekhinah, the presence intensifies that we totally bind with Hashem. That's the act of Kohen. That's the consummation of the marriage. So the three stages of Shabbos, Friday night, Shabbos morning, and Friday and Shabbos afternoon, each one was an upgrade, another level of presence of God's presence, and therefore each one's expressed is during the Amidah. It starts with Kedushin, betrothal, celebration of the marriage, which is the chuppah, and the mincha is ato echad. We become one. It's the unification with God. Friday night, if you notice, in the bracha b'kadosh, we say v'yinuchu vo. God rested. Vo is feminine for Shabbos. Vo. During the daytime, it's vo. Vo, masculine. Him. Mincha is vom. Vom is plural. They. We go from feminine, masculine to plural. What is this all about? Again, this is the reflection of the three levels of God's presence. We begin at the lesser level. Therefore, it's expressed that what? As vo. The morning that both it's celebration. The bride and groom, that's vo. Now the groom is obvious. It's not just the woman is the wife, is betrothed to the man. Here it's together, they're celebrating. That's vo. But what do they celebrate? The man took the woman. That's masculine. Mincha is echod. That means they're unified. It's vom. Each of them are key players in this relationship, the man and the woman. And therefore that represents the Shekhinah, which we totally bond with the Shekhinah in the afternoon. It's cited from the Arizal that the Arizal, Friday night, when he said the blessing of the Kriya Shema before the Amidah, and he would say, "Ufros aleinu sukkah shlomecha." You should spread upon us the sukkah of your peace. What's the sukkah? What's the sukkah? A sukkah protects a person. The sukkah of God's peace is the Shekhinah. At that moment, the Shekhinah enters into this existence. The Arizal would stand up. The Arizal went to the mikveh 3 times on Shabbos. At the entry point of Shabbos, right before Shabbos began, to prepare himself, to purify himself to receive and welcome the divine presence. He would go again in the morning. Of course, it was an upgrade. The divine presence was another level. So he would go again. And in the afternoon, which the divine presence, the Shekhinah, was even more advanced, he would go again a 3rd time to the mikveh. Because for each level of relationship, of intensification of Shekhinah, the Arizal would upgrade himself. That's the understanding. But what happened at Sinai? What happened at Sinai is what we're discussing in the Ramchal. We were chosen to address the objective of creation. The world was created imperfect. We were created imperfect. What's the objective? That through our initiatives, which is called free choice, every choice we make, which is the correct choice, we perfect ourselves. With what? What was the mechanism? What's the medium through which we bring about perfection? Those are the dictates of the Torah, the positive commandments, not to violate the negative commandments, and to take the initiative to do the positive commandments. That upgrades us continuously until we reach our potential, if we do, which is when God takes us from this world. So that it goes hand in hand. Sinai, we were chosen for that. We are the people to be the ones. The Torah was given to the Jews. The only way we can achieve that level of perfection is only through the Torah itself. That's the medium. And that's the challenge. Why? What is the Torah? Torah is God's wisdom. We say in the blessing of the Torah, Asher bocha bonu mikol ha'amim, God chose us of all the nations. V'nosa lanu es Torah so. He gave us his Torah. Doesn't say he just gave us the Torah. I give you a gift, right? Here it's called Torah so. It's his personal. It's something personal to him. We find the Torah is called Kli Chemda. It's something which is precious beyond what precious is. What's most precious to him, he gave to us. As we say, as Shlomo Melech says, Ki lekech tov nosati lochem, Torah siyato zovu. I've given you the best commodity. There's no better commodity than Torah. Don't abandon it. Why? Because the only way you're able to address your purpose and your existence is only through this commodity. Nothing else will do it. You come up with your own idea how you could achieve perfection. Has no relevance. The only ways you could attribute your spirituality to advance it and to fill in the gaps, so to say, to bring about a level of perfection is only through its medium. Hashem, the nosel is Torah so. God gave us his Torah. It's Torah so. And it's very interesting. The Gemara tells us, the Talmud tells us that a Talmud Chacham is a positive commandment that you're obligated to revere a Torah sage. Torah obligation. As Hashem Elokecha Tiro. Just as you must revere God, you must revere the Torah sage. Torah obligation, positive commandment. Why must you revere him? Because he is the repository of Torah. We read in the first chapter of Tehillim, we find the Torah is referred to as Torah Hashem. It's the Torah of God. But after the person studies it, it says, in his Torah, I mean his own Torah, the one who learned it, he will meditate in it day and night. So the Talmud asks, first it's referred to as Torah Hashem, and then it's referred to the Torah of the one who studies it. So the Gemara answers, before you study it, it's Torah Hashem. Once you engage in it, then it's your Torah. And because it's your Torah, if the Torah sage chooses to waive his honor, he has a right to waive his honor. Because once he's acquired it, it's his. And anything belongs to you, you have a right to waive. So now the reason why I have to honor you is because now this is your essence. That's Toroso. That's the Torah of the one who studied it. Therefore, he has the right to waive it. I was just thinking, the Rambam writes in the laws of Talmud Torah, he quotes the Mishnah, the 6th chapter in Pirkei Avos. It says in Pirkei Avos, there were 3 crowns given to the Jewish people. There was Keser Kuhuna, the crown of priesthood, the crown of royalty, and Keser Torah, and the crown of Torah. And it says the crown of priesthood was given to Aaron and his sons. The crown of royalty was given to David Vizaro, King David and his progeny. The crown of Torah was given to every Jew. How do we know the crown of Torah was given to every Jew? Because the Torah says, Morosha Kilas Yaakov. The Torah is the heritage of the house of Jacob. That means every Jew has a right to that crown. And where is it? It's Munachs Bizobis. It's lying in a corner. Every Jew has a right to go take it, partake of it, and he could acquire that crown of Torah. So I asked the question, if a person is not from the progeny of Aaron, does not have the pedigree of a Kohen, and he puts on this vestments, it doesn't make him a Kohen. It's only if you have the pedigree of a Kohen and you wear the vestments, now you qualify to officiate. If a person is not a king and he puts a crown on his head, is he the king of Israel? He's not the king. If you're from the Davidic line, so the crown only identifies you what your essence is. The Kohen, when he wears the vestments, he's functioning in terms because that's who he is. The king who's a descendant who has the pedigree of David, when he's chosen to be the king, he's wearing the crown because he was chosen of the progeny of David to be the king of Israel. But yet, before you study Torah, what are you? You're a Jew. After you study the Torah to a very advanced level, you acquire a crown. But Torah knowledge, it's knowledge. You're the same person. The others, each one is the pedigree. You're either Kohen, you're born a Kohen, you die a Kohen. You're born with the pedigree of royalty and you die with the pedigree. When you're born, you're not born with the Torah. It's something you have to study. It's knowledge. So how could we say that the crown of Torah is the equivalent of the other crowns? You say you possess it, but it's not what you are. So what do you see from the Mishnah Pirkei Avos or the Rambam? That when a person studies Torah, there's a metamorphosis which takes place within the person, and it becomes his essence. It's not something which is cerebral, I acquired knowledge, but rather what? So with the Ramchal, it's very good. Why was the Torah given to the Jewish people? What is the objective of creation? To perfect our souls. So why is our soul, why did it go from a deficient level to a more complete level? To be qualified to have a relationship with God is because the Torah itself allowed that upgrade, that perfection take place. So it's not something in our minds. It's not just cerebral. What's the essence of a human being? The essence of a human being is a soul. The essence of a Jew is his neshama. Only the Jewish soul is able to cleave to God because we chose that Sinai for that purpose. We were given the medium, which is the Torah, the commandments, to address that deficiency, to be able to upgrade, because through that we're able to achieve perfection. If that's the case, it's not something outside of us. It is us. Because what happens when you study the Torah? The level of perfection which is achieved within the soul, that's only through the Torah itself. If that's the case, it's no different than the pedigree of the Kohen and the pedigree of royalty, of David. This is our soul. Our soul becomes an enriched soul. The soul is enriched. So that's the person himself. So if you have a magnified soul, a soul that's enriched to a greater degree, that's the crown of Torah. That's your essence. Because now that you've achieved that in your essence, now you have a greater relevance to be able to cleave to God. That's the crown of Torah. Understanding this, we speak about royalty. The Talmud tells us, Man Malchi, who are the kings? Man Malchi Rabbanon. Who are the kings of Israel? The Torah sages. They are the kings. They are the kings. Why? Because it says in that same chapter, it says, you may think the crown of Torah is less than the crown of priesthood and the crown of royalty. The crown of Torah surpasses all of them. Because we say that kings are coronated with the Torah itself. So if the king is coronated with Torah, evidently that's the ultimate level. That's the ultimate level of advancement. Because the only way a Jew is able to cleave to any degree to God is only if you have the Torah itself. The Gemara tells us at the end of one of the tractates, based on verses, that at the time of resurrection, God will drop dew. You ever see the way fish spawn? Their eggs, thousands and thousands of eggs. The male goes, and when its sperm touches every one of these eggs, there's like an explosion of fish. They begin spawning. Lahavdil. It's called Tal Tchiyah. It's the dew of life. When it comes to the time of resurrection, God will call out people to be resurrected. And he will drop this dew of reawakening, and it will touch the people who are in the ground, and they're going to sprout. They're going to come to life. But it says, what's the Tal Tchiyah? What is this dew of life? That's only one who possesses Torah. If you possess Torah, that dew of life will reactivate that, and the person will come alive again. Why only the one who possesses Torah? Because again, what is Tchias HaMeis? What's resurrection? Resurrection means it's a time where God will create a perfect setting that the human being, body and soul, will be able to cleave to God. The body will be recreated from that original pure matter to be together coalesced with the neshama, that the body will take on the characteristics of the soul, of the spirituality of the soul that it achieved. The perfection of the soul will manifest itself in the perfection in the body itself. So a person will be able to cleave to God not only in soul, even in body, because it becomes one entity. But who's able to cleave? The do which brings about life resurrection, only the one who possesses Torah. So the Gemara asks, so what about if a person didn't study Torah? Why should he be resurrected? Didn't study Torah whatsoever. So Gemara says that if a person even didn't study Torah, but he supported Torah, or he was important that he allowed another person to study Torah, he was an adjunct to the Torah, that's a sufficient connection that he will be resurrected. But a person who was totally divorced and devoid, no relevance to Torah, that person will not be resurrected. There's a story many years ago, I heard from somebody, a person is no longer alive, he'd be in his mid-80s. He told me that in the early 50s, there was a person who came to yeshiva, brilliant person, and he had a phenomenal mind, and he had very little background. Within a short period of time, he advanced tremendously, and he spent about 3/4 of a year in the yeshiva. And then all of a sudden he disappeared. Didn't tell anybody. As he showed up, that's the way he disappeared. And he had a Jewish name. His family name was Jewish. And this person who had a little bit of relationship when he was there became a lawyer, was a great Talmud Chacham, this person, and he was a first-class lawyer. And he traveled to San Francisco because he was a partner in a law firm for a meeting in San Francisco. There was a conference. And he sees this person, and he looks slightly familiar. And he realizes it's this person who disappeared. And he goes over to him, and he tries to remind him, man doesn't want to know. He changed his name. His name was not a Jewish name, married to a non-Jewish woman, cut off every connection to Judaism. He did not want to identify as a Jew. Didn't know whether he converted to another. It doesn't make a difference. Did not want to identify as a Jew. Name change, non-Jewish wife. Doesn't want to even have any relevance to his past, whatever that past was. You understand? This person has no chance to be resurrected. The only reason why you're resurrected is because his soul has relevance to God. You can only cleave to God if there's some level of commonality. What's the commonality? That's you perfected your soul. But if the man himself abandoned that medium through which you could perfect your soul, when God resurrects the dead, this man is not coming out of the ground. Because again, his soul was never perfected with the medium which God gave to perfect that soul. So this person will remain foregone forever, never to be brought back. But a Jew who has relevance to Torah, any relevance to Torah, even if he supports Torah or he encourages others, speaks positive to Torah, that person has relevance to the Torah itself. Although his level of upgrade may be minimal, but it's enough of relevance that he will have relevance to God, because the only medium which we could achieve perfection to any degree and to address that deficiency is only the Torah and the mitzvahs themselves, which is what we read about. That was the Sinai event. Sir.
The question is, since Hashem offered the Torah to all the nations before he offered it to us, the descendants of Esau did not accept it because they said that they lived by the sword and died by the sword. So
therefore, it says lo tirtzach. It says thou shalt not.
So they said it right. That doesn't apply to them. They couldn't accept the Torah. So the question I have is, if since they already were bound by the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, and they already couldn't kill, how was that fit in?
Why was that a basis to reject the Torah? Okay, it's a good question. So the answer is given. This comes this coming week, we read, Eila Mishpotim Asher Tosim B'fneim. These are the laws you should present before them. Okay? It says that if a person has a law, a case that has to be adjudicated in court, a Jew cannot go to a secular court. You have to go before the court, which is a Jewish court. And if you go to a secular court, it's considered a Chil Hashem. That's creation of God's name. Because you're giving value to them. What they represent is without what we represent. We say every morning in the Psukim de Zimra, one of the Psalms, we say, Umishpatim bal yudum haluko. Our laws have no relevance, is unknown to the Gentiles. Umishpatim bal yudum. Magid verb Yaakov. He said his words to Yaakov, Chukov mishpatov liYisrael, and his statutes and his laws to the Jewish people, and for the world, bal yudum, he did not inform them. So the Midrash asks, what do you mean? There's a law, you're not permitted to steal. You have to have a judicial system. And we're saying even if the law is identical in this by the non-Jew as the Jew, it's a different law. Why? Gives examples. The law is, what's evidence for a Jew? You have to have 2 qualified witnesses. A non-Jew, even a single witness, is considered evidence to put a person to death. A Jewish court, you have to have minimally 3 judges to adjudicate. A single judge is not enough. What about if the witness is related? Or he has some other deficiency? Does he still qualify as evidence? The answer is yes. For a Jew, not. You have to meet certain criteria to be a credible witness and having 2 witnesses. So there are many details. So that although the law is the same, if you steal, you're guilty and you must return the stolen object and so on and so forth. But the nuances of differences, and those differences make the difference. What does that mean? So one of the things is, the Gemara tells us that if a person goes and undermines another person's livelihood, you undermine his livelihood. It's ki'ilu notal nishmoso. It's like you took his soul. Murder doesn't mean taking a knife and plunging into a person's heart. Doesn't mean that. Of course, it means that. But for a Jew, it means there are other nuances which are no less than that. What you do to a person, you actually, what's a person's dignity? His dignity is that he's a self-earner. He's not a ward of other people. And you go and you undermine that dignity and take it away from him, it's like you took his life. You took his soul. So what is ritzicha, what's murder for a Jew, in between our relation with God and for the Gentile, it's a different reality. 7 Noahide laws, you have to actually end his physical life. That's taking a life. For a Jew, of course, that is also. But there are many other applications of that, which the non-Jew is not bound to those applications. And it's in every one of the areas of the 7 Noahide laws regarding what's considered adultery, what's considered incest. A non-Jew is permitted in certain relationships. Sexual, a Jew is not permitted. And those relations fall under losinov. It's not a permitted relationship. For a non-Jew, the act of intimacy is actually the ultimate act of intimacy. For a Jew, even the person doesn't, God forbid, complete the act. Whatever it is, the Jew's liable. So the certain nuances of every one of the Noahide laws, which for the non-Jew, it's literally what it says. A, B, C, D. The subcategories or peripheries of that have no relevance to the non-Jew. For the Jew, it has relevance. Because the Jew himself his essence is a spiritual being. Spiritual being means you can't have any relevance to any of those areas. And therefore, as in addition, we were given 248 positive commandments and 365 negative commandments. Why the negative commandments? As we always say, I say in the name of the Maharal, the negative, what is the connotation of a negative commandment? Don't cross the line. What are don't do's? I've given you a certain dimension of spirituality. If you cross that line, you'll be diminishing your spirituality. For the non-Jew, it's not 7. For the Jew, he has 365. Why? Because the Jew, what's considered the soul of the Jew is a different dimension of soul. And the slightest degree of going off the perfect level, it's a diminishment of the soul. For the non-Jew, it's not. Non-Jew has a different soul. So this spiritual sensitivities of a Jew to be able to achieve perfection, to be able to cleave to God, even the slightest deficiency already is a problem. The value of a non-Jew is not to cleave to God. You're supposed to maintain what you have. But the ultimate cleaving to God, that's not a Jew. That's not a non-Jew. That's only the one who received the Torah. That's who we are. Obo Sidbok, there's a positive commandment where you should cleave to God through the study of Torah, supporting Torah sages, marrying the daughter of a Torah sage. All this, the non-Jew has no relevance to that.
So the Edomites, they could have accepted the Torah.
Listen, God knows. God had.
Of course.
The Gemara tells us. Wait, the Talmud tells us. The Gemara tells us. God only offered it to the nations because if He wouldn't have, and He would give it to us, they say, "What about us?" God says, "No problem. I'm going to offer it to you," knowing they're going to turn it down. They're going to turn it down. After they turn it down, now they can't come back and say, "Why don't you offer it to us?" But they're not finished. The Gemara tells us that at the end of time, they're going to come with a claim against God, even though you offered it to us. But you put a mountain over, the Jews said, "Why don't you put a mountain on our heads?" Even though we turned it down, you should have forced us to accept it, as you forced the Jews to accept it. And God goes through many things. So God says, "I should have forced you to accept the Torah. You don't keep the 7 Noahide laws. You accept to observe 613 dictates. I mean, who are you fooling?" But they go back and forth and back and forth. The non-Jews are not happy. And that's the end of time. He's give them an easy mitzvah, the mitzvah of Sukkah. And they fail. So that's proof of the pudding that you have no relevance to having a relationship with God. And that's the end of the day, so to say. That's the end for them, that's the beginning for us.